The Vrickian command ship loomed large in the viewport, its sharp angles and glowing edges a stark contrast to the welcoming curves of human vessels. Captain Alex adjusted his uniform, giving himself a once-over in the reflective surface. "You've got this," he muttered, flashing a confident grin. First contact with the notoriously stern Vrickians was no small task, but diplomacy was Alex's bread and butter. The docking bay hissed open as Alex stepped out to meet his liaison. Commander Zryl stood at the end of the ramp, her tall, imposing figure framed by her silver armor. She exuded authority, her stern gaze fixed on Alex as he approached. "Captain Alex, welcome aboard," she said, her voice a cool blend of curiosity and control. Alex extended his hand, offering a firm handshake. "Commander Zryl, it's an honor to meet you. I look forward to building something meaningful between our people." Zryl's grip tightened around his hand, her intense gaze holding his for a beat too long. "Your gesture is unexpected," she said, tilting her head slightly. "But it carries weight. I hope you're prepared to follow through." Alex chuckled, oblivious to the double meaning. "Of course. I always deliver." The exchange seemed to fluster Zryl, though she quickly recovered. Gesturing down the corridor, she led him to the negotiation chamber. The walk was silent but not uneventful. Alex couldn't shake the feeling she kept sneaking glances at him. Maybe she was sizing him up for the treaty. The chamber was as austere as the rest of the ship, with a long table that seemed carved from a single block of obsidian-like material. As they took their seats, Zryl observed him with a focus that bordered on unnerving. "Captain," she began, her voice steady but with a strange undertone, "your reputation precedes you. Humans are unique in their approach to diplomacy. Your methods have intrigued many of my kind." Alex smiled, leaning forward slightly. "Well, we do like to keep things flexible. Adaptability is key in any relationship, don't you think?" Zryl's posture stiffened, and a faint flush spread across her cheeks, a phenomenon Alex had no way of interpreting. "Adaptability," she echoed, almost to herself. "Yes, that will be critical, if we are to proceed." Before he could respond, Zryl abruptly stood, pacing the room. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, as though she was wrestling with something invisible. "Forgive my distraction, Captain. This is an unusual time for my people. Our instinct season complicates matters." "Instinct season?" Alex asked, curious. "It is a rare biological phenomenon," Zryl explained, her tone tight. "It heightens certain impulses. Normally, it does not interfere with our duties. But your presence," she trailed off, her piercing gaze locking onto him. Alex blinked. "My presence? I hope I haven't done anything to disrupt your focus." Zryl shook her head sharply. "No, not disrupt. Enhance, perhaps." "Enhance?" Alex asked, tilting his head in confusion. Zryl's jaw tightened as she turned away, seemingly frustrated with herself. "It is of no consequence. Let us focus on the treaty." The negotiations began smoothly enough, with Alex presenting the holographic framework his team had prepared. But every time he spoke, Zryl's attention seemed to waver, her sharp focus giving way to something unreadable. "This clause ensures mutual benefits in resource sharing," Alex explained, gesturing to the floating text. "A win-win situation, wouldn't you agree?" Zryl's gaze flicked to his hand, then back to his face. "Win-win," she murmured, almost distracted. "Yes. That would be desirable." Alex hesitated. "Are you feeling all right, Commander?" Zryl straightened, her composure snapping back into place. "I am fine. Proceed." As the meeting progressed, Alex's diplomatic instincts told him something was off. Every time he made a point, Zryl seemed to respond with an odd intensity. When he joked about how humans valued close partnerships, she visibly flinched. By the time the session concluded, Alex felt both accomplished and perplexed. Zryl escorted him back to the docking bay, her demeanor even more rigid than before. Thank you for your time, Commander, Alex said as he prepared to board his shuttle. Zryl hesitated, her hand twitching slightly. Captain, she said, her voice softer than he'd heard it before. Your adaptability. It is commendable. Alex grinned, taking it as a compliment. Thank you, Commander. I'll make sure to keep it up. Zryl's eyes widened, and for the first time, Alex thought he saw genuine panic flicker across her face. But she quickly masked it, nodding curtly before turning on her heel and striding away. As the shuttle doors closed behind him, Alex sighed in relief. Vrickians sure are intense, he muttered. Little did he know, the intensity was only just beginning. The treaty negotiations resumed the next day, with Alex feeling optimistic despite the lingering awkwardness from his previous encounter with Commander Zryl. She was already seated when he entered, her posture stiff, hands folded tightly on the table. Alex couldn't help but notice the subtle way her gaze flickered toward him and then quickly away, as if trying to suppress some inner conflict. Commander Zryl, Alex greeted with a smile. Shall we pick up where we left off? Yes, she replied, her voice clipped. Let us progress efficiently. Alex activated the holographic display, highlighting new clauses designed to foster economic cooperation. This segment focuses on trade, he explained. We've structured it to align with both human and Vrickian systems, ensuring mutual growth. Zryl leaned forward, studying the projection, but her attention seemed divided. Mutual growth, she repeated slowly, her tone carrying a strange weight. You are thorough, Captain. Alex chuckled lightly, assuming it was a compliment. Well, I like to be comprehensive. It's important to cover all angles. Her fingers twitched slightly against the table's surface. Indeed. Thoroughness is a valuable trait, especially in partnerships. The words hung in the air, and Alex suddenly felt a bit self-conscious under her unwavering gaze. He decided to shift the focus back to the treaty. Clause 5 ensures a fair exchange of technological resources. I believe this will set the foundation for long-term collaboration. Zryl's brow furrowed, her attention momentarily drawn back to the display. Collaboration, she said, almost to herself. Her expression softened, but there was something unsettlingly intense about the way she looked at Alex. Humans seem unusually skilled at fostering connections. Alex nodded, completely oblivious to her implication. It's in our nature. Relationships, alliances, they're what we thrive on. Zryl's armor creaked as she shifted in her seat. Yes. I am beginning to understand that, quite clearly. Alex pressed forward, eager to keep things on track. Clause 6 outlines conflict resolution protocols. If disputes arise, both parties can engage in mediation rather than resorting to hostilities. Zryl raised a hand to pause him. Mediation, she repeated, her lips quirking in what could only be described as an attempt at a smile. Is that how humans resolve tension? Alex hesitated, unsure why her tone sounded so peculiar. Well, yes. Mediation is all about finding balance and addressing concerns directly. Her expression tightened, and she seemed to deliberate for a moment before leaning closer. And, what if the tension cannot be mediated verbally? What is your alternative method? Alex blinked, caught off guard by the question. I suppose physical activity can help relieve stress. Humans do that sometimes. Zryl's eyes widened slightly, her face tinged with the faint glow of her species equivalent to a blush. Physical activity, she echoed, her voice lower than before. Fascinating. The air in the room grew heavier, and Alex could feel the atmosphere shifting into unfamiliar territory. Determined to regain control of the situation, he gestured to the next clause. Right, so about resource distribution. Captain, Zryl interrupted, her voice firmer now. You speak of partnerships, collaboration, and balance. Tell me, do humans ever falter in their adaptability? Are there limits to your flexibility? Alex frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. I suppose everyone has limits, but we pride ourselves on pushing past them when it matters. Her gaze bore into him with unnerving intensity. Pushing past limits, she murmured. Yes, I have observed that trait in you already. It is admirable. He cleared his throat, trying to refocus the conversation. Thank you, Commander. Now, if we could just... I must ask you something, Zryl interjected, her tone softer but laced with an edge that made Alex pause. If I were to propose an unconventional test of your adaptability, would you accept? Alex tilted his head, confused by her choice of words. A test? What kind of test? She straightened, her composure momentarily faltering before she replied, a test of connection. To ensure our compatibility as allies. Alex hesitated, unsure whether this was some kind of cultural custom or an overly formal way of discussing diplomatic trust. Well, if it's important to the treaty, I'm open to it. Zryl's lips parted slightly, her breath catching in what almost sounded like relief. Good, she said softly. Then we shall proceed, carefully. Before Alex could question her further, the door slid open, and a subordinate entered with a data pad. Zryl snapped back to her usual stern demeanor, barking orders that sent the officer scurrying out. Alex took the opportunity to gather his thoughts. Something about Zryl's behavior didn't add up. Was she testing him as a negotiator, or was there something more going on? Either way, he'd have to tread carefully. When Zryl turned back to him, her expression was once again composed, but her gaze lingered just a moment too long. We will continue tomorrow, Captain, she said curtly. Alex nodded, rising from his seat. Looking forward to it. As he left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Something about Zryl's words, and the way she said them, lingered in his mind, leaving him both intrigued and uneasy. The following day, Alex entered the negotiation chamber, determined to iron out any lingering awkwardness. Zryl was already seated, her hands clasped tightly together, a rare sign of tension for someone of her disciplined rank. She looked up sharply when he entered, her gaze locking onto his as though she had been waiting for him. Captain, she said, her voice steadier than the previous day but tinged with an undertone he couldn't quite place. Commander Zryl, Alex replied with his usual diplomatic charm. Let's make today productive, shall we? Zryl nodded slowly, her eyes following him as he Saturday, yes, productive. She hesitated before continuing, you possess an unusual way of approaching these discussions. Your adaptability is evident. Alex smiled faintly, still unsure of her fixation on that particular trait. Flexibility is key in any partnership. It helps us find solutions where others see problems. Her gaze sharpened. And you are willing to push these limits, even when challenged? Alex leaned back slightly, considering her question. Within reason, yes. Negotiation is all about understanding the boundaries and finding a way to work within or around them. Zryl's hands unclasped, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. Boundaries, she repeated, almost as though testing the word. Do humans view such limits as obstacles to be overcome? Sometimes, Alex replied. It depends on the situation. Boundaries can be useful, but breaking through them often leads to growth. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and Alex could see her deliberating something internally. Before he could prompt her to move on, she spoke again, her tone softer but laced with an uncharacteristic hesitation. Would you say humans thrive on tension? Alex blinked, thrown by the question. Tension? Well, not exactly. We work to resolve it, but sometimes it can lead to creative solutions. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying him intently. Fascinating. He shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Commander, is something on your mind? For a moment, she didn't respond, her expression unreadable. Then, almost abruptly, she rose from her seat and began pacing the room, her hands clasped behind her back. Captain, your presence has introduced variables I did not anticipate. Your methods are unorthodox, and they evoke responses I find difficult to quantify. Alex frowned, unsure where this was headed. If there's an issue with my approach, I'm open to adjusting. She stopped pacing, turning to face him. Adjusting, she said slowly, as though savoring the word. Yes. Humans seem uniquely adept at that. It is both admirable and disconcerting. Alex chuckled nervously. I'll take that as a compliment. Zryl's head tilted slightly, her piercing gaze softening just a fraction. It was not intended as criticism. If anything, your presence has made these negotiations more engaging than I expected. Engaging, Alex echoed, his tone carefully neutral. I hope that means we're making progress. Her lips twitched as though she wanted to smile but held herself back. Progress, yes. Though not in the way I anticipated. Alex's unease grew, but he pressed on, pulling up the holographic display. Let's review the conflict resolution protocols. I believe we left off on the specifics of mediation strategies. Zryl moved back to the table, though her focus seemed to drift as he spoke. When he finished outlining the clause, she leaned forward slightly, her voice quieter than before. Captain, do humans always approach challenges with such confidence? He raised an eyebrow at the sudden shift in topic. Confidence is important in diplomacy. It helps build trust. Her gaze flicked to his hands, which rested on the table. Trust, she said softly. An essential component of any collaboration. Alex nodded. Exactly. Trust is the foundation for any successful partnership. Her hands twitched, and for a moment, she looked as though she wanted to reach across the table. Instead, she exhaled sharply and straightened. Captain, I must be candid. Your presence here is testing my composure. Alex froze, caught off guard by the blunt admission. Testing your composure? In what way? She hesitated, as though weighing her next words carefully. Humans possess a peculiar energy. It is unlike anything I have encountered before. It disrupts my focus, and yet, she trailed off, her eyes meeting his with a startling intensity. And yet, he prompted cautiously. And yet I find myself drawn to it, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling between them. Alex's diplomatic instincts screamed at him to tread carefully, but he was at a loss for how to respond. I'm flattered, he ventured, unsure if that was the right thing to say. Her expression flickered, a mix of frustration and something he couldn't quite identify. This is highly unprofessional, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Alex cleared his throat, deciding to shift the focus back to the treaty. Maybe we should take a step back and focus on the task at hand. Clause 7 outlines. Captain, Zryle interrupted, her voice firmer now. Do you always deflect when confronted with unconventional dynamics? Alex opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. I try to keep things professional. Her lips twitched again, this time in what might have been amusement. Professionalism. A commendable trait. But there are times when adaptability requires improvisation. Improvisation? Alex repeated, feeling increasingly out of his depth. Yes, she said, her tone steady but laced with an undercurrent of something that made his pulse quicken. And I wonder, Captain, how far your adaptability truly extends. The tension in the room was palpable as Alex sat across from Zryle, her piercing gaze locked onto him with an intensity that made his usual confidence falter. He adjusted his collar, trying to appear unaffected. Commander, if there's something specific you'd like to address, I'm open to hearing it. Zryle exhaled, her fingers tapping lightly against the table's surface. Captain, you have demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience during these negotiations. Traits that my people value deeply. Her voice dipped on the last word, carrying an undertone that Alex couldn't quite place. Thank you, Commander, Alex said cautiously. I aim to represent humanity in the best light possible. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. Your best light shines brightly. Alex blinked, unsure whether that was a compliment or something else entirely. I appreciate that. Now, about the resource-sharing clause. Captain, Zryle interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. I must confess, these discussions have stirred unexpected responses in me. He hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. Unexpected responses? Could you clarify? Her fingers stilled, and she straightened, her composure as rigid as her armor. Your presence has affected me in ways that are challenging to articulate. My people's instinct season amplifies certain impulses. Being near you has heightened them. Alex felt the air leave his lungs as her words sank in. Heightened? Like stress? She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Not stress. Something more primal. He cleared his throat, his diplomatic instincts kicking into overdrive. I'm honored to have made such an impression, but perhaps we should refocus on the treaty. That's why I'm here, after all. Zryl's lips pressed into a thin line, her frustration barely concealed. Always so professional, she muttered under her breath. Then, louder, Captain, do humans ever allow themselves to simply feel? Alex blinked at the unexpected question. Feel? Of course, but in diplomacy, it's important to remain composed. She leaned back slightly, studying him. Composed. Yes, I see that in you. But is there ever a moment when composure gives way to instinct? He opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. I suppose there are times when instinct takes over, but I try to avoid those situations in professional settings. Her lips curved into a faint, almost mischievous smile. You are a fascinating contradiction, Captain. So composed, yet adaptable. Controlled, yet willing to improvise. Alex felt his pulse quicken, unsure if her words were meant as a compliment or a challenge. I'd like to think that balance is what makes a good diplomat. Balance, Zryl repeated softly. Perhaps that is what I seek. Before he could respond, she rose abruptly from her seat, pacing the room with an almost restless energy. Her movements were precise, yet there was a tension in her posture that betrayed her usual composure. Commander, Alex began cautiously, if there's something you need to address, I'm here to help. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her gaze intense. Help. Such a simple word, yet it carries so much meaning. Alex nodded, unsure where this was going. It's what I'm here for. Zryl stepped closer, her expression softening just slightly. And would you offer help even when it requires stepping outside your comfort zone? He hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. I suppose that depends on the situation. Her gaze didn't waver. This situation, Captain. You are unsettlingly effective at disrupting my focus. My instincts conflict with my duties, and I find myself at an impasse. Alex felt his palms grow clammy as her words sank in. I didn't mean to cause any disruption. If I've overstepped, I apologize. No, she said quickly, her voice firm. It is not your fault. Your presence merely accentuates certain aspects of our interaction. He leaned back slightly, his mind racing for the appropriate response. Well, I'm glad I could contribute. Her lips quirked into something that might have been a smile. Contribute. Yes, you have contributed to an interesting dynamic. Alex felt his nerves spike. Commander, perhaps we should take a moment to step back and reassess the treaty. It's clear tensions are high, and tensions are not the issue, she interrupted, her voice steady but with an edge of something more. The issue is my inability to navigate this situation without conflict. He swallowed hard. Conflict? Between us? Between instinct and reason, she clarified, stepping even closer. Your presence challenges my discipline, Captain. And I do not know if that is a strength or a weakness. Alex felt cornered, both literally and figuratively. I'm just here to negotiate. Anything beyond that is unintended. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her expression. Perhaps unintended, but not unwelcome. The room fell silent, the tension between them almost tangible. Alex scrambled to find the right words, but nothing came. Finally, Zryl straightened, her composure snapping back into place. "Forgive my candor," she said, her tone formal once more. "I allowed my instincts to interfere with our discussions. It will not happen again." Alex exhaled, relieved and confused in equal measure. "No apology necessary, Commander. Let's focus on finalizing the treaty." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes. Let us finalize." As they returned to the holographic display, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this negotiation had gone far beyond the usual challenges of diplomacy. And as Zryl's gaze lingered on him just a moment too long, he realized this was one mission he wouldn't forget anytime soon.